Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Niels Henrik Hoge. I'm from NOAA, Friends of the Earth, Denmark, and Nuclear Transparency Watch. And I'm happy to welcome you to this webinar, which we hope will be the first in a series of webinars on EU treaty change in the energy field. A few introductory remarks are probably appropriate. A fair question to ask is this: how relevant is this issue actually? And the likely answer would be more relevant than ever. The last major treaty amendment took place in 2007, which was the adoption of the Lisbon Treaty. Last year, the recommendations from the Conference on the Future of Europe were published, and they presuppose treaty reform. There could also be another reason for reform. If EU 27 expands to EU 31 or even EU 36, a streamlining of the decision-making process would be necessary, and this would also require a treaty reform. This was one of the considerations of the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's recent speech in Prague, where he refers to a future union consisting of up to 36 member states. In his speech, he calls for reform of the European treaties, partly in order to streamline EU's decision-making process so it cannot be blocked by one or a few member states, and partly following the recommendations from the Conference on the Future of Europe. These, however, do not call for treaty amendment in the energy field. In this regard, the German Chancellor has aligned himself with the French government as well as other member states, the European Parliament and the European Commission, that have all called for European constitutional amendment pursuant to Article 48 of the Treaty on European Union. So in fact, it is possible to view progress in the treaty reform process as a parameter for progress in the EU enlargement process. However, it should be noted that 10 member states have expressed their adversity to treaty reform. So what could a treaty amendment process include? This is also a relevant question because it's a constitutional amendment procedure on the Treaty on the European Union, Article 48, establishes that everything is in principle on the table, not only the aforementioned issues. Process, politics, strategy, and tactics matter. So considering that Euratom is energy related, it could be argued that it makes political, strategic, and tactical sense to include all energy related proposals for constitutional reform simultaneously in the amendment procedure. The EU needs a new overriding vision in the energy field, which only a treaty on renewables, energy efficiency, and energy saving can provide. There's a substantial need for a stable framework for the long-term deployment of renewables, and in a negotiation situation, it would make sense to have as many sensible options on the table as possible in pursuing a sustainable green European energy transition. So the aim of this webinar is to discuss the need of reform or abolishment of the EURATOM Treaty and how EU's constitutional framework could look like if it included mechanisms for an efficient and timely green energy transition. For this, I will give the floor to Julia Bonert. She's a Master of Science and Master of Arts and spokesperson and project manager in the Austrian NGO platform against nuclear dangers. She will give us an NGO perspective on the pros and cons of the EURATOM Treaty and present her recent report on the same subject. You can ask questions in the chat, and we will hope to get through them all, or you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question after the presentation. Julia, the floor is yours.
Yeah, okay. Well, let me just start sharing my screen. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julia Bonat. I'm a researcher and an activist working with the Platform Against Nuclear Dangers, and we are based in Salzburg, Austria. When it comes to EURATOM, we closely collaborate with the organizations Atomstopp Oberösterreich in Austria, Réaction aux Chaînes Humaines in France, the Don't Nuke the Climate Campaign International, and of course, NOAA Friends of the Earth Denmark. I'm pleased to share our point of view on EURATOM with you today. So let me start with an example of how EURATOM informs European energy policies. As we all know, EURATOM is not in the media much, right? So I'd like to speak about the green investment label, the European taxonomy, which was in the media a little recently. The European Parliament was about to decide whether nuclear energy and gas would be included in the taxonomy in July last year. We asked the Parliament to vote it down and to say yes to democracy and yes to a credible and science-based taxonomy. Let's take a look at what happened outside the Parliament's building before and after the vote.
Gas is a fossil fuel, and you will not change it by calling it green and sustainable. It's a dirty fossil fuel, it's a bloody fossil fuel, and it kills our present, not even our future. And so if you are serious about solidarity with Ukraine, if you're serious about the climate crisis, then vote it down. When do we want it? Now! So vote it down! Vote it down! Vote it down!
It means that Parliament has not objected to the Commission delegated regulation of 9th of March 2022. We move next.
We do not want to hear any more words from you. Any promises, any words of solidarity, any words of concern. It's empty. We don't believe you anymore. Because if you were trustworthy, you wouldn't put out a taxonomy that's a fossil fuel taxonomy. So do not give us more words.
All right, so that, I think that was a very powerful video, right? It still gives me goosebumps because I was there on the street with my little daughter back then. So the taxonomy case is very complex, and I will try to break it down to the most relevant elements. The taxonomy regulation came into force in July 2020. It's a classification system aimed at combining, on the one hand, the economy and on the other hand, the environment. So economic activities which contribute to achieving 6 environmental goals will be labeled as green. This is supposed to direct financial flows in sustainable channels. The inclusion of nuclear and gas in the taxonomy, however, was a very highly controversial issue for months. So who sits at the taxonomy table? First of all, we had the European Commission. To supplement the existing regulation of 2020, the European Commission was authorized to adopt a delegated act. A delegated act can only revise non-essential parts of legislation. There are profound indications that the European Commission exceeded its power by including nuclear and gas in its draft. It was a political and not a technical decision. And beforehand, the Commission consulted 2 independent bodies which relate to and which are financed by EURATOM. So, the European Parliament, as a co-legislator, was demoted to merely saying yes or no to an essential and precedent-setting part of European legislation. Amending the Commission's draft was not possible. The responsible committees, Environment and Economy, came out strongly and said no to the greenwashing of nuclear and gas. The plenary vote, however, labeled them as green and sustainable. So nuclear energy will be favored on the financial markets in the future. What about civil society? We were on the streets, but no, we didn't have a say. Despite the better regulation guidelines, civil society participation was completely bypassed in the whole process. So who else sat at the table? Well, definitely French President Macron. He lined up with 6 other member states, urging the Commission to uphold the European Treaties. More precisely, he meant abiding by the Euratom Treaty. So this is where Euratom comes in. So what did Macron say? The development of nuclear power is one of the primary objectives of the Euratom Treaty. The Euratom Treaty obliges EU institutions to promote nuclear energy. Furthermore, referring to the Hinkley case, which I will talk about later, Macron said that nuclear power is an objective of common interest in the European Union. Well, thanks, Macron. I couldn't have summed it up better. So let's take a closer look at the European Commission. My first take-home message, there will be 3 of them, is that the European Commission represents the European Atomic Energy Community. Well, of course, you might say, of course, the European Commission is the custodian of the European treaties. That's right. But what we see here is that they do not represent a renewable energy organization. It is these 27 folks, including President von der Leyen, who have a clear mandate. For instance, they negotiate and sign agreements on behalf of Euratom. Given that, I sometimes ask myself how independent the European Commission can be at all. As we've seen in the taxonomy case, not very. So let's go back to Rome in 1957. The 2 Roman treaties established the European Economic Community on the one hand and the European Atomic Energy Community on the other hand. So later we had the signing of the Maastricht Treaty in 1992, we had Amsterdam in 1997, Nice 2001, Lisbon 2007. So as we are here now today from wherever of the world you're joining the webinar in 2023, we have 2 treaties defining the workings of the European Union. This is the Treaty on European Union, TEU, and the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, TFEU. Well, what has happened to Euratom since then? Nothing. Euratom has remained unchanged since 1957. Other European communities, for instance the one for coal and steel, have expired in the meantime. That takes us back right to the euphoria in the 1950s and 60s about nuclear energy as a panacea for all energy matters. It's a totally different context in terms of public acceptance of nuclear energy, in terms of available technologies, and in terms of energy policies. Euratom has survived nuclear disasters like Church Rock and 3 Mile Island in 1979, Chernobyl 86, Forsmark 2006, Fukushima 2011, and all the other serious incidents. Well, you know, sometimes we need to suppress things, right, in order not to freak out. So what we see here is that Euratom has survived each and every advancement in the energy sector, unchanged. That's a scandal. I personally like to think of Euratom as a dinosaur. My daughter really loves dinosaurs. So the dino is very persistent. He will turn 66 this year. Sometimes he's tired and asleep. But believe me, whenever the pro-nukes groups need him, he will firmly stand his ground. Let us look at this chart again. So we have the European Union on the one hand and Euratom on the other one. We have two separate legal entities, and yet they are intertwined because they share the same institutions and budget. The image I have in mind is one of two parallel systems moving in a different direction at a different pace. Well, let me show you. That's what I mean. So here we have the European Union, which evolved over time. Think of the development of environmental law, for instance. And here we have Euratom, which just got stuck back in 1957. The logic of the two systems is also very different. When it comes to radiation protection, for instance, the European Union would aim to protect the population and the environment, while Euratom aims to promote an industry. And you wouldn't like to regulate an industry too much that you basically intend to promote, right? So what we can say is that none of the Euratom regulations live up to the best-in-class standards. Euratom contradicts many norms of the European Union. And what I'm also trying to emphasize in that chart here is that the TEU and the TFEU are at the top of the hierarchy of union law. So is Euratom. They are known as primary legislation. So what does that mean? It's hard to believe, but it's true. As primary law, the Euratom Treaty has the same legal value as the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. This is powerful. We are not talking about access to clean water here. We are not talking about human dignity. We are talking about a high-risk industry, the promotion of a high-risk industry, which has serious health and environmental impacts. Well, since my organization is based in Salzburg, one of its most famous landmarks, the Salzburg Fortress, shouldn't be missing from my presentation, right? So sometimes I wonder if the Euratom Dino lives up there. The Dino has established a special space, an exclusive and protected zone for itself and the nuclear industry within the fortress. So the liberalization of markets is somehow an object of worship in the EU, right? Accordingly, we have the EU's internal energy market, marked in gray here. But what stands out and what is excluded from this market is the Euratom Fortress. The fortress secures the privileges for one single industry and fends off nasty things like the free competition on the market. How does that work? Let me give you an example. Hinkley Point C is a nuclear new build in the UK. In 2013, the construction company, French state-owned EDF, struck a deal with the UK government. Among other concessions, the European government guaranteed EDF a price of £92.5 for each megawatt hour generated by Hinkley over its 35 years of operation. To draw a comparison, UK offshore wind farms came at a low price of £39.65 per megawatt hour, even back then. That was 2019, right? The numbers. So a study by the German company Energy Brainpool shows that the subsidy would amount up to 108 billion euros over 35 years. The deal provides EDF with a huge selective advantage on the market. The European Commission, here we go again, approved the British state aid in 2014 as compatible with the internal market. It justified its decision based on Euratom. What followed is a lawsuit over 6 years, with the Austrian government lodging an appeal against the distortion of competition, and the European Court of Justice finally dismissing the appeal in 2020. What can we learn from that case? Well, Euratom defines its own powerful legal system for the use of nuclear energy and secures the exclusive funding of a high-risk industry. Well, right at the moment, we wonder whether the Euratom Dino will be resurrected in the case of other planned new builds, for instance, in Czech or in Sweden. Tremendous subsidies just to construct a nuclear power plant based on Euratom again. Well, so we have financial favors like state aid measures or the greenwashing of nuclear energy in the taxonomy, but the money for the nuclear industry also flows in other channels based on Euratom. So this is just a quick overview to complete the picture. So we have the Euratom Research and Training Program and ITA, of course. So the first 2 points mainly cover research and training. And what we need to understand, this is the main financial pillar for nuclear research in Europe, right? So then we also have a special loans project, and we have the Instrument for Nuclear Safety Cooperation as a direct support of Euratom's foreign policy. Yes, the community has its own foreign policy. And it's obvious that all the money here could be invested in other forms of energy production, right? So this is a clear political choice. €1 spent is €1 spent. We also have concrete institutions which derive their legitimacy from Euratom and employ thousands of people. So if you need any further details, please check out my analysis. It will soon be available in English as well. So generally, I'm not such a big fan of such figures, because to some of us, the amount of money is little, to some of us, it's a lot. But what really matters to me is that all of us here understand that Euratom is a system that penetrates European energy policies. And that takes me to my next slide and my last argument. So literally, see, the Dino has created a special political, legal, and economic zone around itself. And the fortress contains this sacred zone and serves as a semi-permeable membrane. So that means the Dino can go out freely for a ride, right, and influence all the things happening outside. But the fortress doesn't allow anything in, any elements in. For instance, democracy. So Euratom is not subject to any democratic control. When it comes to Euratom, the European Commission acts beyond any checks and balances. The role of the European Parliament is downgraded to a mere consultative function. For instance, it's not entitled to supervise the Commission, and it cannot decide on Euratom's international agreements. Euratom clearly stands apart from all the improvements in transparency and democratization that have been achieved through the reforms of the EU Treaties. So it's a very undemocratic zone, a very undemocratic capsule within the European Union. One example, the European Citizens' Initiative is an instrument of direct democracy introduced by the Lisbon Treaty. European citizens can ask the European Commission directly to take action on a particular subject. One of the first initiatives registered was My Voice Against Nuclear Power. It was rejected by the EU Commission based on Euratom. There we go again. Euratom doesn't allow any citizens' initiative against nuclear power. Wow. All right, so my last take-home message is Please bear the dino and the fortress in mind whenever you hear of Euratom. Sometimes I wonder, how would an energy transition look without the dino? What would a truly free energy market look like without an exclusive and protected zone for the nuclear industry? Where would we stand grappling somehow to achieve the Paris goals? So I'm really keen to work with you on getting rid of the dino. And I will continue to do so, even though I'm finishing my projects with Plage right at the moment. So I'm open to new job opportunities and ideas for collaboration. If you have any, please get in touch with me. Here is my email address, and here's the website from Plage. Euratom will still be one of Plage's main areas of work, definitely. And you know what? One day I hope to tell my daughter finally that dinosaurs do not exist any longer. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank you, Julia.
Julia.
Thank you, Julia, for this very interesting presentation. If there are no clarification questions, perhaps we could proceed with Professor Michael Geislinger from University of Salzburg in Austria. Among other things, Professor Geislinger is an expert of public international law, international environmental and economic law, and a member of, among others, Deutsche Gesellschaft für Völkerrecht and member of Österreichische Völkerrechtlertag. I hope I pronounced that correctly. The floor is yours, Michael.
Thank you very much. It is difficult now after this great presentation to shift to a lawyer's business, but please let me take up the ball I just got. What happened on the legal ground was that the ideas that have been raised and the critics that have been raised by non-governmental organizations with regard to Euratom were focused on a conference in 2018 that has been organized by new Friends of the Earth, by Plage and Swedish NGO Office for Nuclear Waste Review, the Danish Ecological Council, Sustainable Energy, Nordic Folk Center for Renewable Energy in Denmark, in Copenhagen. And they developed the idea of adding a protocol to the EU Treaty, which should focus on renewable energy, and thus give a treaty platform basis for funding and developing renewable energy. But this protocol did not think and did not touch at Euratom. And that's when we sat together with Niels on the internet and with others, in particular also the predecessor of Julia at Plage. At that moment of time, we said, why not to include the contents of the proposal of this protocol, which has been elaborated also by an Austrian, an attorney, Dr. Bergmüller, and to introduce them directly into the Euratom Treaty, and thus to use the existing Treaty of Euratom, but to slowly change it with the aim of letting Euratom expire, to kill the, not really to kill, but to let the dino die. We proposed a date in 2040 to say 31st of December 2040, this goal shall be achieved, and it shall be the period until then shall be slowly used in order to let the activities of Euratom be changed to activities in the interest of renewable energy. So if you look at the two pictures here, you can see the idea was, of course, not taxonomy, which would be here, but to fully let renewable energy flourish within the European Union. So to say, to inhalate nuclear energy in the interest of renewable energy. And do this by evolution and not by revolution. That means let Euratom slowly die and expire its activity, as this has been done in a couple of member states of the European Union as a result of the disaster of Fukushima. Now, this means once more to keep in mind what you just heard from the representative of the NGO sector. What is Euratom Treaty? It means the creation of a separate regional organization. Until the Treaty of Lisbon, there was a roof above the European Union Treaty and the Euratom Treaty, and as long as the Treaty on coal and steel also existed, also with this third organization, and the roof was the European Union. But with the Treaty of Lisbon, the Euratom was left in a corner, which was linked, and at the moment is linked to the European Union only by administration through the same bodies, but there is no common roof anymore. And the decisive function of Euratom is to give a privilege to nuclear energy compared to all other types of energy, which means the treaty, the Euratom Treaty, is the reason why nuclear energy is separated from ordinary EU regime and helps to hide issues and risks that are linked to the use of nuclear power for energy production. There's on the one hand the precautionary principle, which is one of the customary law principles in public international law with regard to environmental law, which prohibits any activity in the international relations that could cause a damage in other countries from an activity in a given country where the technology is not really elaborated, so that the risk cannot really be managed. Then we have the issue of the waste. We have the impossibility of safe storage, and we have the problems of non-disclosure of the real costs of nuclear energy. To form an own protocol and to add this protocol to the EU Treaty. This has the advantage that the reform of the energy sector would not be a ball in a political game with regard to a full or complete EU reform. Because what we see nowadays is that there's a lot of critics with regard to the European Union. And the question is, what would happen with energy if one opens up the EU Treaty for a general revision? One has to be afraid that the energy and the question in particular of sustainable energy, renewable energy, that this would be a part of the discussion that would be sacrificed to major other interests. For example, the question of forming a principle of unanimous decision-making in foreign policy matters, as this has just recently been raised by the German foreign minister. Now, these issues would lead to a bargaining in any such discussion, and therefore it seemed to be and still seems to be much more preferable to say, let us do and develop the legal fundament of the use and prosperity of renewable energy within the European Union without touching at the EU in total. Which means that we needed to go for a gradual liquidation of Euratom, for securing that the phasing out of the use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, that this happens safely and gradually, and leads to a final solution where the complete energy system will be subject to the EU and to the EU bodies without the possibility of any privileging of the nuclear power. Now, how does this look like in practice? We have only a few time today, so let me give you just a few examples. If you look at the contents of the Euratom Treaty, you see on this file on the left hand the current contents, and on the right side you see what needed to be amended. And let's stay with just the title, the tasks of the community. We needed to split it into two tasks. On the one hand, the tasks of the European Atomic Energy Community, and please consider that this would work until the end of Euratom, which would be proposed to be done by 31st December 2040, as I told you. But then in parallel, we needed already to use this time from the entry into force of the protocol for developing tasks of the European Union with regard to renewable energy, which tasks the EU bodies do not have at present. So this would be a new subtitle that needed to be developed, and in fact in the text which is available on the website of NOAA still, there you can see what does this mean then when it comes to the complete set of articles of the current Euratom Treaty. Now then, we have currently the provisions for the encouragement of progress in the field of nuclear energy. In the new version, it would be replaced by the tasks of the European Union with regard to renewable energy, because this is the replacement of nuclear power as it is envisaged here. The promotion of research could stay the same, but what the thought behind is that research is not being used and funded in the big amounts you saw from Julia's presentation, but is funded exclusively for the purpose of stepping out of nuclear energy. Because you need research also for this. You need to manage the risk. You need to do research on the risk. You need to do research on a final storage of nuclear waste. You need to do research on the further use of uranium or what will happen with this. You need to think of the people that are working in this sector, and you need to do research on how they can be accommodated and what other fields of work can be offered for them so that nobody will suffer from this change of strategy in the energy sector. Then if you look at the chapter dissemination of information, it's the same, it can stay as it is, but the purpose of this information shifts to the development of renewable energy instead of the use of nuclear energy. The same for health and safety, for investment and joint undertakings. You can use joint undertakings as they have been developed in the field of the nuclear energy, but for the purpose of renewable energy, which would give them a real push in the economic development, and would thus make the whole sector also economically much more interesting than it currently is. I could continue this for the whole contents, but please, time does not allow, and therefore let me shift to the preamble. The preamble is very critical in an international treaty because even if it is not considered to be the part of the so-called operative provisions of a treaty, it is used as an integral part for the interpretation of all provisions of the treaty. And if you look at the current preamble of the Euratom Treaty, it strikes immediately into the eyes that the nuclear energy is an essential source for development of industry and advancement of peace. Now, this is something what Julia described to you as the legal basis, last but not least, of how the European Commission, for example, in the Hinkley case, is working, because they are not working against the current legal regime. They are using the current legal regime, and in particular, this task emanating from the preamble, the creation of conditions for a powerful nuclear industry. This needs to be replaced, for example, by safeguarding the functioning of the energy sector based on the precautionary principle, based on the other environmental law principles, which are the principles that preventive action should be taken, that the environmental damage should as a priority be rectified at the source, and the so-called polluter pays principle, that the one that creates damage to the environment shall pay. So this, together with the safeguarding of efficiency and energy savings, with the development of new renewable energy sources, with their integration into the market, with the promotion of the interconnection of energy networks. This is what would be the contents, the wording of the new preamble. And if you will visit the NOAA website, you can read how the new preamble, using many phrases of Berg-Müller's protocol draft, would look like. This we could continue with all articles in the current Euratom Treaty, but I just want to show you the major ones. In Untitled 2, the deadline for 31st of December 2040, then that all current tasks of the Euratom shall be redirected towards supporting the phasing out from nuclear energy, that the EU will apply its environmental competences also with regard to the renewable energy sector, in particular sticks to Articles 11 and 191 and 194 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. So to create energy transition, to ensure a secure and environmentally friendly supply of renewable energies, to promote savings, to promote energy efficiency, and the respective research. Now, the wording which I proposed in this protocol is, of course, free for negotiations because it's an initial draft, and starting from the deadline, 31st December 2040, until all the elements, the wording, there's much room left for negotiations. This would be the task of a conference once put together, and they would need to discuss each of the provisions I proposed there with regard to ownership, with regard to the elimination of all provisions on nuclear common market. The most important is to initiate, to instigate this discussion and these negotiations, and then to go on compromises, which would have been easier, I tell you openly, in the period 2019 when NOAA published this proposal until the Ukraine crisis. Because the more expensive the gas supply has become in Europe, the more difficult it has become now to discuss on an expiry of nuclear power. But I'm optimistic at some moment of time the Ukraine war and the whole crisis linked to the Ukraine war will be finished. And I'm pretty sure that without Russian gas in Europe, there will be no future. And at some moment of time, the relations will be restored to acceptable for all standard. And therefore, we need to be prepared. The NGOs need to be prepared, need to continue the discussion, and at I say a happy moment in the near future, I think the negotiations then could start. I thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'm happy that so many have found the time to follow us. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for this very interesting presentation. I have put a link to your treaty draft in the chat, so people can check out the draft in its entirety. It appears that there are no there are no questions in the chat, but I have two clarification questions for you. The first one is that in your treaty draft on the suites of treaties, as I understand it, the Euratom and nuclear part will be phased out by 2030, but the provisions on renewables and energy efficiency and energy conservation will enter into force immediately. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that is fully correct. But it is simply to give the necessary time for the phasing out of the nuclear power industry, because as you know, and as we saw from the examples in the member states that did successfully accomplished the phasing out, it needs a certain time to do it on a safe ground and to manage all the problems that are linked with this phasing out process. But you are fully correct. This takes place at the same time, but the phasing out issue is one side, and a clear and very energetic start of the use of use and development of renewable energy is the other side of the contract, of the treaty.
Thank you for this answer. And my second clarification question would be your conception on the renewable energies and energy efficiency and energy conservation is to a very large degree based on the proposal put forward by the Austrian government back in 2016 for a protocol on this issue. So, in fact, your treaty draft is not, so to speak, at least regarding the renewable part, alternative. It's actually a very official and mainstream proposal, which was actually put forward by one of the member states, but unfortunately, so far with not much success. Isn't that also correct?
Yes, that's fully correct. But I didn't do a plagiat because they didn't. They didn't make this effort with regard to the Euratom Treaty. But I thought it was with regard to renewable energy. This project of the Austrian government was an very interesting and encouraging effort that simply needed to be redirected and readjusted, because if you leave the Euratom untouched, then the key problem shown by Julia will not be solved. You cannot reform the energy sector without touching at Euratom. And therefore, to say, let us simply stay with the European Union and do not touch at Euratom does not work. And this is, of course, in particular for President Macron and France and the states that were strongly supportive for the use of nuclear power, difficult. It's a challenge for them, but such challenges have been managed in earlier times also by other states. So with the help of the European Union, it can be managed throughout Europe. I'm fully convinced.
Thank you for this answer. And if I may add, the point I was trying to make was that your treaty draft, in fact, is highly mainstream.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Maybe I also may add something to that. So I think I really hope that my presentation made it clear, and Michael, you just repeated it. So Euratom is the base, the foundation of many things that have happened in European energy policy since 1957 and which continue to happen. So if we are not talking about Euratom, we must talk about Euratom to shape the European Union's energy future. We definitely must talk about Euratom then. And I know it's a very complicated juridical process. It's not easy. And what we NGOs will try to continue to do is to scandalize the issue. So I hope that you will just, if you could take something from my presentation, go out and spread the word with whomever you meet. It will help us, because the more people are aware of Euratom, the better we can fight against it. Yeah. Thank you. And please, if you have any questions, are there any questions about the basics of Euratom, how Euratom works? Do you have any questions? Please feel free to ask and to come forward.
Thank you for this comment, Julia. And if I may say on behalf of Nuclear Transparency Watch, which is also an NGO, we hope to continue with our focus on these highly relevant issues, and hopefully there will be a succession of webinars on EU treaty change in the energy field in the coming months. Perhaps we should wrap up now if there are no further questions. What do you say, Malcolm?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. It's really tempting to actually ask a question, and I have some, but we also have 3 minutes left. But I think we can continue as you said, the discussion. I will publish the video on our channel. There are comments to be made, and I think it's a topic we'll continue. But it's a subject I discover for most parts, and I see it's quite crucial. And if I understand well, it's just one clarification I would like to get is, if I understand well, there is no expiration date to the Euratom Treaty. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And the other qualification would be also, so it would be it won't be possible to create something similar than the Euratom Treaty on renewable.
It would be possible, but as long as you let Euratom stay as it is, you will not come to a free competition on the energy market, and therefore this would not give a real chance to renewable energy.
Even with the same privilege that Euratom has, for instance?
This will be difficult because, in principle, you can privilege just one type of energy. If you try to split it, you need to touch upon Euratom.
Indeed.
And this makes then that will be the start of this difficult discussion.
Thank you very much.
With that, I would like to thank our excellent lecturers, and I hope that we can continue the discussion on these highly relevant issues in the frame of Nuclear Transparency Watch. So goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye.
Have a nice day.
Goodbye. Thank you.